Hi there, everyone. My name is Ben Sale. I'm a naturalist. I used to work at the Dunes Learning Center, but now I'm working as a naturalist out here in California. Today, we're going to do one of my favorite things, and that is to look for mushrooms out on a hike. We're going to learn about how important they are for our environment and how they grow. All right, you guys, to start, I want to talk a little bit about how mushrooms grow. On this visual here, you can see this portion called the mycelium of the fungus is actually where the body of the mushroom is. These little roots grow in the soil or into the wood, and they're actually doing the decomposing, the digesting for the organism. The mushroom that grows out of that mycelium is more like the fruit. You could think of it as like an apple, the mushroom as an apple growing off the tree, which is the mycelium down here. Now, the whole point of our mushroom here is to release spores, which are just like seeds. All right, so now we're going to take a look at some actual mycelium that's growing under this log. Come on in close here. You can see this white, sort of puffy, almost stringy-like material that's growing on the leaves and on the log. That is the mycelium, and that is actually what is decomposing this piece of wood and digesting it and breaking it down, turning it back into soil. All right, so there are 3 different ways that fungus get food. The first is by decomposing things. So the mycelium of this fungus is actually inside the log, digesting it, and you can see that it's putting out its mushrooms. So that's what we call decomposing when it comes to fungus. Other mushrooms, like these brightly colored chanterelles, are actually called mycorrhizal mushrooms. That means mushroom roots. The mycelium of these mushrooms trades nutrients from the soil to the trees around us for sugars from the trees. They have a symbiotic relationship. The trees couldn't survive without the fungus, and the fungus couldn't survive without the trees. The third and final way that mushrooms get food is by being parasites. And these orange jelly mushrooms are a perfect example. They are actually eating the mycelium of this other fungus right here. So they're stealing nutrients from that other fungus to get their own food. So we talked before about the whole point of a mushroom. The whole entire point of a mushroom is to disperse the spores to make more fungus in different places. One of the best ways to identify mushrooms is by how they're dispersing their spores. And there are tons and tons of different ways that they do that. The most common one that you might think of is gills, but there are tons and tons of other ways that they are going to disperse their spores, and it's a great way to identify them. And we're going to go out and find as many different ones as we possibly can. All right, you guys, so it looks like we found our first mushroom out here, and it has, for its spore dispersal method, gills on the bottom. So you can actually see those tiny little lines on the bottom of the mushroom cap, and that is where the spores are going to be produced, and that is how it's going to spread those spores around. So we found these mushrooms right next to our gilled mushrooms. This is another spore dispersal method. These are what are called puffball mushrooms. So it's just a big ball, right? And inside is where the spores are going to be formed. And when they're ready, a tiny hole will form in the top of the cap, and raindrops hitting the mushroom or an animal touching it will shoot those spores out of the mushroom. I'm going to just open it up right here so we can see what's going on inside the mushroom where those spores are forming. Right now it's still really wet, but all that brown mass is going to turn into spores eventually. So we found some more puffballs. And in the next clip, we're actually going to show you what it looks like to poke them with the spores shooting out of the hole in the top of the mushroom. So it looks like we found some other organisms out here on our walk. These are not fungus. They're actually called slime molds, but they're decomposers just like fungus, and they do a lot of the same things in terms of spreading spores. These ones are called the wolf's milk slime mold, and you'll see why when I press on that. Ooh, it just squeezes out that jelly. Eventually, those will turn into solid balls, very similar to the puff balls, and they'll shoot those spores out. Now right here is another slime mold, and you can actually with this one see the spores coming off of it, which is a really great example when we're learning about spore dispersal. So when I touch these mushrooms, you're going to see a cloud of spores come right off. So here we found some turkey tail mushrooms. They're called turkey tails because they have these bands that almost look just like a turkey's tail. These mushrooms are going to disperse their spores. If you get real close up with that, you can see the tiny little holes on the bottoms of the mushrooms. And those are actually where the spores are going to fall out of. All right, these next mushrooms here are called bird's nest mushrooms or bird's nest fungus. And they actually disperse their spores in a really cool way. They do look just like little bird's nests. And those, instead of eggs, they have these spore sacs that are, when they get hit by water, they shoot the spore sacs out of the little cup or the nest of the mushroom. And that's how they disperse their spores. These mushrooms here are called cup mushrooms, and they disperse their spores in a really, really cool way. If you blow on them or disturb them at all, they'll shoot their spores out in sort of what looks like a puff of smoke. So the orange the orange peel mushrooms in the next video are going to do just that. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. I hope you learned something about mushrooms, and you can take that knowledge out on a hike or even in your own backyard. Just start checking those mushrooms for those different spore dispersal methods. Have a good one.